Hidden crime stories. The Zodiac Killer. The letter arrived at 3 newspapers simultaneously. August 1, 1969. The Vallejo Times-Herald. The San Francisco Chronicle. The San Francisco Examiner. 3 nearly identical envelopes, dropped in the mail by the same hand, reaching 3 different newsrooms on the same morning. Each letter contained something that made editors stop what they were doing and reach for the phone. A confession. The writer claimed responsibility for 2 recent attacks that had left 3 people dead and 1 critically wounded in the San Francisco Bay Area. He described details that had never been released to the public. Details that only the person who had committed those crimes could have known. He was not anonymous in the way of most confessions. He was something more deliberate than that. He was introducing himself, and at the bottom of each letter, alongside a cipher, he demanded be printed on the front page of every newspaper under threat of more killing. He signed it with a symbol, a circle, crossed by 2 lines, like a gun sight, like a crosshair aimed at everything it touched. He called himself the Zodiac. What followed, over the next 5 years, across the San Francisco Bay Area and the corridors of law enforcement agencies that are still working this case today, was unlike anything American criminal history had produced before, or has fully produced since. A killer who used the media as his stage, who taunted investigators with coded messages, blood-stained shirt fragments, and letters so psychologically precise that forensic experts spent decades trying to understand what kind of mind could have written them. He killed at least 5 people. He claimed to have killed 37. He was never caught. To this day, the Zodiac Killer case remains officially open and active with the FBI, the Vallejo Police Department, and multiple county agencies in California. No individual has ever been arrested or conclusively identified as the killer by law enforcement. His identity is still unknown. On Hidden Crime Stories, we walk every confirmed step of this case. From the first double murder on a dark California road in December 1968, to the last authenticated letter received in 1974. From the investigators who dedicated their careers to finding him, to the amateur codebreakers who cracked a cipher that had defeated the world's best minds for 51 years. This episode is different from every other story we have told on this channel, because this one does not have an ending. And understanding why it doesn't, understanding what the Zodiac Killer did that made him so extraordinarily difficult to catch, and what that teaches us about violence, media, and the human need for attention, is the most important thing this case has to offer. Stay with me. To understand the Zodiac Killer, you have to understand the world he operated in. The 1960s marked an era of social upheaval in California's Bay Area. Amid sporadic violent protests condemning war, racial injustice, and suppressed free speech, hippies flocked to San Francisco, bringing idealistic messages of love and peace. It was a world in ferment, a world where the old certainties were coming apart and nobody was entirely sure what was replacing them. Into that world, in the final weeks of 1968, stepped someone who would exploit its fractures with extraordinary precision. The Zodiac attacked 7 people on 4 confirmed occasions in California. 5 victims died, 2 survived. He targeted young couples parked in remote locations. He targeted a cab driver in a residential neighborhood. He attacked 2 college students on a lakeside afternoon. He was not random in the way that most violence is random. He was methodical, deliberate, and fully in control of every situation he constructed. And then, when the killing itself was not enough, he picked up a pen. What most set the Zodiac apart was not the murders, but the psychological campaign that surrounded them. He understood something about human nature and media that most people in 1969 would not have been able to articulate clearly, that terror is a story, and stories need a narrator. He made himself the narrator. He controlled the information. He decided what the public knew and when they knew it. He sent pieces of his victims' clothing to prove authenticity. He sent ciphers that promised to reveal his identity. He signed each letter with a symbol that became one of the most recognized icons in American criminal history. He was not just a killer, he was a performance, and for 5 years he gave that performance to an audience of millions, and then simply stopped, leaving the stage before anyone could bring the curtain down on him. Let's say the names of the people the Zodiac confirmed killing, because in a case where so much is uncertain, where the suspect count runs into the dozens, where the claimed victim count of 37 has never been verified, the 5 confirmed victims deserve to be the fixed points around which everything else is organized. David Arthur Faraday was 17 years old. Betty Lou Jensen was 16. They were shot and killed on December 20, 1968, on Lake Herman Road near Benicia, California. They had parked on a remote stretch of road on a winter evening. 2 teenagers, a first date, an ordinary night in every way that should have mattered. They were the Zodiac's first confirmed victims. On July 5, 1969, 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and her 19-year-old companion Mike Mageau were parked in a car in a remote location when a man approached and opened fire. Ferrin was killed. Mageau survived, badly wounded, but alive. Mageau's account gave investigators their first eyewitness description of the suspect, a round-faced white male, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall. An hour after the attack, a man called the Vallejo Police Department. His voice was low and monotonous. He reported the crime, gave the location, and claimed responsibility for the earlier murders on Lake Herman Road. The call lasted under a minute. He had waited. He had called. He wanted them to know it was him. That phone call, that deliberate, controlled act of self-identification, is the moment the Zodiac's true psychology becomes visible. He was not simply killing, he was communicating. The murders were the opening statement. The letters and calls were the argument he actually wanted to make. The Lake Berryessa attack in September 1969 was the most theatrically disturbing of the confirmed assaults. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking on the shore of Lake Berryessa in Napa County when a figure approached them wearing a black executioner's hood with a white crosshair symbol stitched on the chest. He carried a knife and a gun. He tied the couple together and stabbed each of them repeatedly. Hartnell survived. Cecilia Shepard died of her wounds 2 days later. Before he left the scene, the Zodiac took a black marker and wrote on the door of Hartnell's car, recording the dates of his previous attacks alongside the new one, signing his work like an artist labeling a canvas. The final confirmed victim was cab driver Paul Stein, shot in the head at point-blank range in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco on October 11, 1969. The Zodiac then removed Stein's wallet, his keys, and a piece of his blood-stained shirt, which he later mailed to newspapers as proof of what he had done. 3 teenagers witnessed the killing in progress and called police. Officers caught a glimpse of a white male fleeing the scene. And then, in what became one of the most agonizing near misses in the entire history of this investigation, 2 patrol officers stopped a man matching the description just blocks from the scene. A miscommunication in the dispatch had described the suspect as a black male rather than a white male. The officers let the man go. He walked away into the San Francisco night and was never identified. The letters are where this case becomes genuinely unlike anything else in American criminal history. On August 1, 1969, 8 months into his homicidal campaign, the Zodiac sent 3 nearly identical letters to 3 Bay Area newspapers, taking credit for the murders and including a 408-character cipher he demanded be published on the front page. He threatened that if the newspapers did not comply, he would cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night. Within a week, a civilian couple, Donald and Betty Hardin, living in nearby Salinas, cracked the 408-character cipher. Its decrypted message was disturbing and revealing. It began, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The killer wrote that his victims would serve as his slaves in the afterlife, and that he was collecting them the way a person might collect things of value. The message did not name him. It did not give investigators what they needed, but it gave the world something that has never fully let go of this case. A direct window into the stated psychology of a man whose actual identity remains unknown to this day. The letters continued. 20 or more letters may have been sent by the killer through 1974, with each communication signed by the crosshair symbol and typically including either a new cipher, a piece of physical evidence from a crime scene, or a specific threat against a new category of victim. He threatened to blow up a school bus. He taunted investigators for their inability to catch him. He sent a letter claiming responsibility for an abduction that gave specific details only the perpetrator could have known. He was, in the most literal sense, controlling the narrative. In November 1969, the Zodiac sent a 340-character cipher, known as the Z340, that would resist every attempt at decryption for 51 years. Mathematicians tried. Military codebreakers tried. Law enforcement agencies tried. The Z340 sat unsolved while investigators came and went, while technology advanced and was applied and failed. while the families of his victims aged and in some cases died without ever seeing the case resolved. Then in 2020, 3 amateur sleuths working independently with extra time during the pandemic cracked it. A United States computer programmer named David Oranchak, an Australian applied mathematician named Sam Blake, and a Belgian warehouse worker named Jarl van Eyck broke a code that had defeated the world's best cryptographers for half a century. The decoded message read, in part, "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise. So they are afraid of death." 51 years. And the decoded message still did not give investigators a name. 2 shorter ciphers remain unsolved to this day. Before we go any further, I want to pause for just a moment. This is a different kind of episode for this channel. There is no arrest coming. There is no verdict. There is no moment where justice arrives and the case closes cleanly. If that is making you feel something, if the weight of that unsolved question is sitting with you right now, take 5 seconds and subscribe to Hidden Crime Stories. We bring you cases like this every week, the resolved ones and the ones that aren't. The stories that give you answers and the ones that give you only better questions. Subscribe right now and let's get into the investigation, because what the men who chased the Zodiac found and what they missed is one of the most important stories in American law enforcement history. The investigation into the Zodiac killer consumed the professional lives of multiple investigators across multiple jurisdictions. Men who took the case home with them, who worked it on their own time, who retired still thinking about it. The only suspect investigators ever officially named was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who died in 1992. Allen had been identified as a person of interest through a web of circumstantial connections that, taken together, were deeply compelling. He had owned the same type of watch bearing the Zodiac symbol. He used the same type of ammunition connected to the killings. His handwriting shared characteristics with the letters. A friend had reported that Allen mentioned before the killings began that he had thought about calling himself the Zodiac and hunting human beings for sport. But circumstantial evidence, however compelling its accumulation, is not proof. And every direct forensic test, handwriting analysis beyond the similarities, physical evidence recovered from his property, fell short of establishing what investigators needed to make an arrest stand. Allen died in 1992. The DNA extracted from the envelopes of the Zodiac's letters did not match him. He was either not the Zodiac or the DNA on those envelopes came from someone else entirely, a postal worker, a third party, the possibility that someone other than the writer had licked the stamps. The case did not close when Allen died. It has not closed since. In 2004, the San Francisco Police Department marked the case inactive. In 2006, they reopened it. The California Department of Justice, the FBI, the City of Vallejo, and the Napa and Solano County Sheriff's Offices all maintain the case status as open. Today, the core of the active investigation centers on forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer, applied to DNA extracted from the letters and crime scene evidence collected in the 1960s and preserved specifically for the day when science would advance far enough to use them. That day may be closer than it has ever been, or it may not be close enough. We do not know. And that uncertainty, that clean, unresolved, permanent uncertainty, is the thing this case has always lived inside. In the absence of an arrest, the Zodiac case has generated something that no other American murder investigation has quite produced to the same degree. A decades-long public obsession with suspects, theories, and the question of identity that has drawn in amateur investigators, professional researchers, former law enforcement officials, filmmakers, and cryptographers from around the world. The Zodiac's murders, cryptograms, and letters have made this case one of the most famous unsolved cases in American history. The search for his identity continues to be pursued by amateur detectives all over the world. Beyond Arthur Lee Allen, several other suspects have been seriously investigated and seriously argued over the decades. A team of former law enforcement investigators and military intelligence officers, known as the Casebreakers, put forward a different name in 2021, claiming to have matched physical evidence to a man who died in 2018. Law enforcement reviewed their findings and did not confirm their conclusion. Other names have come and gone, each one generating a period of intense public attention and then settling back into the unresolved pool of possibility when the evidence did not hold up to scrutiny. The Zodiac claimed in his letters to have killed 37 people. Investigators have only been able to confirm 5 deaths directly attributable to him. The gap between those two numbers, 37 claimed, 5 confirmed, is one of the most debated spaces in all of true crime research. Did he exaggerate? Did investigators miss connections? Are there victims whose deaths were attributed to other causes or other perpetrators that actually belong in this case? Nobody knows. And that is the answer to almost every question this case generates, at the level of specifics. Nobody knows. What we do know is this: 5 people were killed, 2 more survived. A man who called himself the Zodiac wrote to newspapers and taunted law enforcement for years. He wore a hood and carved symbols into car doors and called police from payphones in a monotone voice that witnesses described as deliberately controlled. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be the unanswered question. And in that specific, deliberate, chilling ambition, he has succeeded more completely than any other criminal in American history. Before my final thoughts on this one, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. This episode asks something different of you than any other story we have covered on this channel. There was no verdict, no arrest, no moment where everything comes together and justice closes the door. If sitting with that uncertainty brought up something for you, if it made you think differently about this case, or about unsolved crimes in general, please leave a comment right now. Tell me what you think about who the Zodiac was. Tell me what part of this story stayed with you. Your comments keep this conversation alive, and if someone in your life should hear this story, please share it tonight. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, here is what I want you to carry from this one. I want to start with Betty Lou Jensen. She was 16 years old. It was December 20th, 1968, 5 days before Christmas. She was on what investigators believed was a first date with 17-year-old David Faraday. 2 teenagers, parked on a quiet road on a winter evening, doing the completely ordinary thing that teenagers have always done. They were the Zodiac's first confirmed victims, and in the 57 years since their deaths, the conversation around this case has almost entirely been about the person who killed them, rather than the people who were killed, the ciphers, the letters, the crosshair symbol, the suspects, the theories, the documentary series, the cultural fascination with a name that was never even a real name, just a label a killer gave himself because he understood that labels stick. I think that is worth naming honestly before we close this episode. The Zodiac Killer is one of the most famous cases in American history, not because of the scale of his confirmed crimes, 5 deaths, over the course of roughly a year, but because of how skillfully he managed the story around those crimes. He understood something in 1969 that the entire media landscape has since confirmed at scale: that attention is currency, that mystery generates more of it than resolution, and that a killer who controls his own narrative can become something far more powerful than the facts of his crimes would justify. He became a symbol, a meme, a cultural shorthand for the unknowable, the unsolved, the darkness that hides just beneath the surface of ordinary California life. His crosshair symbol appears on clothing and album covers, and in films and television shows. People joke about Ted Cruz being the Zodiac on social media. The name has been completely untethered from the reality of what it represents. 5 people who died on dark roads and lake shores and in the front seat of a taxi, whose families have spent decades without the closure that every family in that position deserves. That is what this case is really about, underneath all the cipher analysis and suspect lists and documentary series. It is about what happens when a killer successfully turns his crimes into a performance, and then disappears before the performance can be interrupted. About how the desire to solve the puzzle can gradually replace the grief for the people the puzzle was built around. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were not puzzle pieces. Neither were Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, or Paul Stein. They were people, with families, with futures that ended on the specific days the Zodiac chose to end them, for reasons that he described in coded messages that even now, decoded, do not fully make sense of what he did. Here is the value I want you to carry from this story. The Zodiac Killer case remains officially open and active, which means somewhere, preserved in evidence lockers and digital files, is the DNA of a man who thought he had gotten away with it completely. Forensic genealogy is advancing faster than almost any other scientific field right now. The same technique that identified Joseph DeAngelo after 40 years is being actively applied to this case. The Zodiac may have believed that disappearing was enough, that going quiet after 1974, never being caught, never being named, was the ultimate act of control over his own story. But science does not care about control. It cares about chemistry. And the chemistry that person left on those envelopes and at those crime scenes is still there, preserved, studied, and now subject to tools that did not exist when he was sending letters to newsrooms. The families of his confirmed victims are still alive. Some of them have been waiting their entire adult lives for an answer. Investigators remain cautiously determined, not because they are certain they will find him, but because the alternative, accepting that he simply wins, that the performance ends on his terms, that the families never get what they deserve, is not something that the people working this case have been willing to accept. Neither should we. David Faraday was 17. Betty Lou Jensen was 16. Their names deserve to be said as often as his symbol is displayed. More often, every time.